Hey, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we talk about the principles behind the plans. I'm one of your hosts. My name's Dave.
And my name is Jeff, and we're part of Allison Park Church. I'm the lead pastor. Dave's the campus pastor at the North Side, and we're glad you've joined us for this episode.
Thanks for joining us, yeah. And as always, we just want to say a quick thank you to those of you who are regular listeners. Thank you for always engaging. Thanks for your feedback and ideas. No new thank yous for 5-star reviews this week, but we'll remind you, we would love to give you a personal shout out. If you want to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review, we will give you a shout out to say thanks. So yeah, glad you're joining us today.
Yeah, and this has been one of those weeks where we have heard a lot from you about our last episode. So I had many conversations face-to-face, by email, by text. Actually, we never know quite what's going to hit, in terms of the topics. But the last episode we did is on this trend that's been talked about in the press a lot recently called quiet quitting. And there was a lot of conversation around that episode. So thank you for the feedback on that, because it really helped us set up the topic for this week. We want to have this will be like a 2-part series. This will be part 2 about quiet quitting that we're going to talk about.
So you had a title in mind. You were saying work-life balance, soul health, and Sabbath.
Yeah. So the conversation was really all about, I heard like this. I totally agree with you, Pastor Jeff, about the Corinthians chapter 3 passage and how we need to work hard as unto the Lord, not just for our employer. And I agree that, we shouldn't be coasting through life. And yet at the same time, and this was some of the stuff that you were voicing in the podcast, Dave, was like, where's the balance? And why do I feel so unhealthy? And what do I do with my boss's demands on me that sometimes feel unreasonable? How do I negotiate for myself? How do I know that I am healthy? And what is this whole issue of the Sabbath? Because I think in the last episode, Dave, you asked that question. We should have an episode on this when we talk about the Sabbath, what that is, what that practically looks like, and how to keep your soul healthy. So we're going to lean into that question. And I know some of you are asking that, boy, I really need help on this issue, because right now I feel like my life isn't quite where it needs to be when it comes to that healthy place.
Yeah. There's actually more controversy than you'd even realize around the Sabbath in Christian circles. Because, so obviously you just kind of have both ends of the spectrum. You have people that probably are a little more sympathetic with the idea of quiet quitting. Maybe you'd say, well, I don't think you should be quiet quitting. But, I do think that there is an obsession with workaholism and accomplishment and materialism. And so, everything needs to slow down. And there's a strong group that's very pro-Sabbath and even more rest, right? And then I guess it's
there's a trend. Isn't there a trend right now too? There's some people who've decided to downsize their life. They get a traveling tiny house of sorts. They reduced all of their expenses and they go around the world, live wherever they want to without a lot of pressure.
Right.
They try to find a job or a hustle that allows for them to get enough income so they can go to the next place and live, and they're not tied down. So this is sort of to me, it sounds like a great vacation. I'm not sure I'd like it as a lifestyle, but this is nothing wrong with that lifestyle, but that is one of the alternatives to the workaholic kind of drivenness that has been a part of the American culture over the last 100 years or whatever.
Right. Well, the other side that I was going to mention that I don't know if you would realize is there is actually a push against Sabbath in a lot of Christian circles.
Okay. So that one side is, I don't want to be workaholic, I want work-life balance. And then the other side is, so we have the 10 commandments from the Old Covenant that were given in Exodus, right? And all 10 of them, Jesus reaffirms in the New Testament and the Gospels, except for the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is the lone exception where he says, don't you realize the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, kind of a thing. And so the argument on that side goes, something like, as long as you're not burning out, as long as you're taking care of your soul, you don't always have to take a Sabbath. It's probably a good principle to do sometimes, but it's not a sacred thing. It's not a sin or a not sin issue for a Sabbath. So if I don't take one this year because I'm working for God, the devil never takes a day off either. Like it's just, we should focus more on the grind side. Here's what I've heard. I actually heard somebody, they'll know who they are if they hear me say, but who always says like, I think that there is a Sabbath idol in America. We idolize this idea of Sabbath or of rest so much that we don't work hard enough.
and it's an excuse to be lazy.
Well, people are all over the map.
People are all over the map.
Yes, this question about work and where it fits in, and rest and where it fits in, and Sabbath and where it fits in, and how do you live healthy, and how do you know if you're healthy? Like, whew, I guess we dove into the middle of something that is really a big question that people are asking right now. So this is where the good discussions happen.
Absolutely.
So do we want to start with the Sabbath question rather than the soul health issue, work-life balance issue? We can start there. That's easiest for us because it's biblical, but I want to follow where your curiosity leads.
Yeah, so why don't you even differentiate what you mean by those two? When you're talking about soul health or Sabbath or work life, you're saying, do you want to start with this one or that one?
Yeah, okay. So soul health is where you feel like all is well with your soul. Like, one of the goals of the gospel is to make you complete. The Old Testament word is shalom. There's peace that extends from within you, that affects you mentally, emotionally, relationally, financially, and spiritually, where you are whole and healthy, and you're living like Jesus promised. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come to give you life, and that more full, more abundantly. So where you feel like, man, I'm good. I'm not carrying around past hurts. I'm not dominated by any habit. My life, I've got the rest that I need. I've got the clarity that I need. I'm where I need to be in terms of the health of my soul. No one's probably at 100%, but maybe we say 90% where I need to be. So that's soul health. Work-life balance contributes to soul health. So if you know where work fits into your life and you have proper hobbies, distractions, relational time, family time, so that work isn't swallowing you, but it's purposeful and intentional in your life. And then rest and replenishment and recreation is a part of your journey. And you feel like you've got a good, healthy rhythm there. That tends to contribute to soul health. And then the spiritual practice of the Sabbath is something that biblically contributes to soul health and to work-life balance.
Yeah.
So the Sabbath is one of these principles we see in the scripture that helps us have the proper work-life balance and a healthy soul.
Yeah. So let's start with the problem then, because I actually think that it's, before we get into any of these different areas you mentioned, soul health, work-life balance, Sabbath, I think the problem is probably a little more important to outline so that we know where we're going from here. So let's just start like this. In the world we live in today, there is just an epidemic of mental health issues. In fact, it said we're in a mental health crisis. You can see this especially in a high-pressure job. And as pastors, when we were, what was the stat? 46%?
42% of pastors are considering quitting.
Yeah, 42%.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's
just pastors. I mean, we look at all professions, probably you see similar stats.
Right.
Which is linked to this idea of the great resignation and people moving jobs like crazy, searching for something that will be the right fit for them.
Well, and I was even thinking of what Greg Surratt said in that video we heard last week at the conference. He was talking about the number of pastors that were dealing with mental health issues or beyond just quitting.
So Greg, who is former pastor at Seacoast and also the one that started the Association of Related Churches, has actually established a retreat center specifically for pastors to get away and be with other pastors and leaders so that they can work on having a healthy soul, which contributes to their longevity in ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
He was the one who pointed out some of these
some of the statistics, which I don't have off the top of my head, but but they are alarmingly high, not just among pastors, but among people in general when it comes to anxiety and depression and just not feeling mentally well, kind of always having this plaguing sense of unease and things. I just don't feel good. It can be a whole, however we categorize it, there's this mental health epidemic that's happening. And this is sort of what propels the whole work-life balance, soul health, Sabbath conversation to the forefront, is because we're diagnosing why is this and how do we address this? Why are people struggling? Is it really work's fault, or it's definitely work's fault, or and so I think it's this epidemic that we're talking about that addresses it. Now, here's what I'll say. There's a book I read by a guy named John Mark Comer. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And
say that slower.
John Mark Comer wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Okay.
He's a guy from Portland, I believe, pastor out there, and author who's written a number of books. And this one focuses on 4 different spiritual disciplines that Jesus modeled that can help us to live with, a healthy soul, if you will, 4 spiritual disciplines that we don't talk about enough to help you to live with a healthy soul. One of them being solitude, which is being totally alone and quiet, which, by the way, I was like, wow, I don't know the last time I've tried to have that. So there were some things that got exposed, but one of the things he talks about is this phenomenon that psychologists have described as hurry sickness.
Yeah.
And hurry sickness is this gnawing feeling of always being in a rush and always, it's probably also linked a little bit to achievement, but it's this idea of like, I can't slow down, there's too much to do, I'm always busy. It's this like, we're stressed out because there's never enough time in a day. We're never getting quite enough done. So he says like, everybody says they're busy. Nobody's ever like, I'm not busy at all. Everybody's always busy. Sometimes what we're busy with is not actually what we would even say is important.
Yeah.
We're busy because there's pressure. And then when we're not busy with that pressure, we're just trying to unload the pressure by vegging out or binging Netflix or whatever it might be.
So there's so many contributors to this discussion. This is like, we could go in 1,000 directions. So solitude is one of those disciplines. Another interference with that is social media.
Yeah.
So when you power down, you're not really powered down. You're looking for that dopamine hit that comes from the next click or like or whatever is happening on social media. So we fill our downtime moments with a lot of things that don't really replenish us. And then we're under pressure and we're in a hurry and we aren't in good community anymore. So relationships have been strained. A lot of times our immediate family unit is fractured and not intact.
Yeah.
And so, and the rhythms of society are sort of out of whack.
Yes.
And so it's like, and then we feel this guilt to be spiritual. Like this is probably where the reaction against the Sabbath comes from, that now you're going to put one more thing on me.
Yeah.
Like I already feel this pressure about everything else. And now you're going to put one more thing on me to keep a Sabbath so that I can feel like I'm failing in one more area of my life. Don't I have enough that I already feel that way about? And I get that. It's because this is like a Rubik's Cube problem. There isn't a simple fix.
Okay. But so let me read the definitions that are listed in this book for what hurry sickness is, because I think it's helpful.
Give us, what's his name again?
John Mark Comer.
Come on, John Mark, give us some insight.
So he said,
we need you.
Hurry sickness is labeled actually as a disease. It's like a mental health disease. So here's several definitions. A behavior pattern characterized by continual rushing and anxiousness. By the way, as I'm reading through some of these, I was like, oh crap.
This is me.
I've never felt more exposed.
Shut the book. I don't want to read anymore.
One of my friends said, because he was working so much summer, he said, I knew I needed to read this book, but I was like, I can't read this until after I get through the season, because I know it's going to make me feel guilty about what I have to do right now. Okay, a couple other definitions. A malaise in which a person feels chronically short of time, and so tends to perform every task faster and to get flustered when encountering any kind of delay. And then lastly, a continuous struggle and an unremitting attempt to accomplish or achieve more and more things or participate in more events in less and less time. So he was saying, if every time you get stuck at a stoplight and you're like, man, I should have run that faster. Or, like anytime like, oh, shoot, I picked the wrong grocery lane. Or, something inconvenient happens, your phone's not loading fast enough, or little things. If you get unexpectedly like ragey about stupid stuff, that might be a sign of hurry sickness. And I was just reading through like, oh no, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've always been like, oh, I'm efficient. Oh, I'm like a Northeastern guy. Like I'm not, I'm not slowing things down. But could these be signs of the fact that maybe my soul health in some of these areas when it comes to rushing and always having to go might be holding back God's best for my life?
Sure.
That was part of what
then there's the underlying causes of it, the fear. What if I don't get it done? What does that mean? The damage that we're carrying of things that have been hurtful and done to us that we haven't processed properly, the expectations of other people, the expectations of ourselves, the perfectionisms that come out there, our view of God. I mean, there's just a whole, our view of ourselves, and all of this contributes to this big old tangled mess of inward anxiety and fear and hurry that we know we have to slow down enough to fix, but it's almost scary to do that because we don't even know where to begin. And so, we could take probably several podcasts just on this topic right here, but where do we start, Dave? Help us. You read the book.
So, well, yeah, this is one of a number of books that's written on the subject. Actually, John Mark wrote a follow-up that was called Garden City that was specifically on Sabbath and the practice of Sabbath.
Okay.
But so if we're talking about these three things, work-life balance, soul health, and Sabbath, let's just start here with Sabbath.
Okay.
Because I think we can get to work-life balance, we can get to other things after. So do you want to define what Sabbath actually even is?
Yeah, so this is one of the oldest concepts in the world because God modeled it for us. He worked 6 days, and he rested on the seventh, and he set a pattern.
In the creation of the world in Genesis 1.
So if you go to Genesis chapter 1, you see, and 2, you see you see God, the Creator, the Father, giving us this pattern. So Sabbath starts with him. So you think the being that runs the universe, that created it all, chose to take the rhythms of rest.
Yeah.
1 day to rest, 6 days to work. So that's a powerful thing. Then this becomes a part of the Israelite Jewish culture. It's one of the commandments to take a day. And then you see in the books of Nehemiah, them getting really intense about those who violated it because the land was supposed to have rest every 7 years.
Yeah.
Their lives were supposed to have rest every 7 days. Every 50 years, they were supposed to take a year of Jubilee and just celebrate the goodness of God. And Israel had a hard time taking regular Sabbath every week. They never let the land rest every 7 years, and they never really fully celebrated Jubilee. Yeah. This becomes a really difficult thing to practice. So this becomes a part of the real religiousness then of the Jewish people, the Jewish faith, until where they start building all of these really legalistic traditions around Sabbath and what you can do and not do.
Which can I point out something interesting that I've realized as I've learned more about this? We always talk about Pharisees as being all these evil people. But actually, Pharisees, it started as this movement to actually try to follow God better.
Yeah.
Because the people of God kept disobeying the laws and they wouldn't follow what God asked them to do to be in relationship with Him.
So then they created these traditions to say, to make sure that you don't break the Sabbath, you can only walk a certain amount of time, and you can't even kill an insect because that might be hunting, and you can't
Right.
There's just all of these things. You can help an ox if it falls into a pit, but you can't do this with your animals on a Sabbath day. So they had to keep track of all of these rules that were built to help them keep the main rule.
Right.
And when Jesus shows up on the scene, and he and his disciples are walking through a grain field, and they're just picking some grain and popping it in their mouth just as a snack, the Pharisees say, "What are you doing? You're violating the Sabbath." And then Jesus makes this revolutionary statement to say, the Sabbath was not meant for you to serve it. Mm-hmm. It was meant for it to serve you.
Yeah.
And I'm now announcing that I'm the Lord even over these commandments.
Yeah.
So I have the right to reorient them if I want to, because you haven't been practicing them properly. This principle of the Sabbath is made for you is where it frees us up. So God is not saying you must do this or else. He's actually saying, look, I created this pattern for you as a gift to help you live a healthy life.
Yeah.
Not for you to fulfill it so that somehow you don't sin, but it's really created as a practice I'm recommending to you to help you live a healthy life. So that's where the idea of Sabbath comes from. Now, our culture in the past, in the U.S., I remember growing up, Dave, and here in Pennsylvania, there was something called the Blue Laws, which meant that our country in certain places made it illegal for businesses to be open or for anything to be happening on a Sunday because the culture was enforcing Sabbath as a society.
Right.
And then somewhere in the 70s, that went away. And I think probably everybody in the world except for Chick-fil-A is open on Sunday. But I would say that since our culture went away from that, we are way more stressed out,
Absolutely.
way more anxious, way more frustrated. So there probably is something to this that our society has forgotten, and we need to get back to.
Right. Well, and so part of what John Mark in this book talks about is how when you look at advertising, a lot of times what you see when people are advertising a lot of basic things is this young adult sitting on his couch playing guitar, looking out at the rain, or people on the beach with some drinks in this picturesque bathing suit, relaxing. And it's always, there's so many pictures that are just people stopping to rest. And it's marketed as if like this throw blanket will make you feel this rest. But, you know, he says like, you actually don't need to buy that throw blanket. You just need to actually take a minute to stop and to allow yourself to relax. And I think, so this whole practice of Sabbath is to say, you know, I have 6 other days in the week to mow the lawn. I have 6 other days in the week to do whatever I might need to do for work, to answer these emails. Like, I can take one day to trust that God's going to take care of me and to allow my soul to just unclench, you know, to be with family and maybe friends and to be in communion with God and to allow myself to slow down, because otherwise we just get caught in this constant cycle of go, 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 which is actually not how we're meant to live.
Right.
I think that just the practice of healthy, real Sabbath, and by the way, there is a distinction between that and a day off. But I think that the practice of just healthy Sabbath would really solve so many of the major mental health problems that we're facing in our culture today.
So let me give you some words that define a good Sabbath. So a good Sabbath day is where you rest. You don't do normal work. That was part of the requirement. You don't do your normal work. You do things that are different from the routine. Second, where you replenish. You do things that make you feel energized. Whatever it is that makes you feel like, whew, that was so good. I'm glad I had the chance to, because now I just feel like I can re-engage again. Okay, you rest, you replenish. Number 3, you recalibrate. This is like when the airplane instrument panel is slightly off and you're no longer flying true north, even though the instrument's saying that it is. It's bringing yourself back to center. It's understanding your purpose. It's focusing on the right things. And then number 4, you remember God, you remember what he's done in your life, you remember who he is, you remember what his purpose for you is. And all of those things, rest, replenishment, recalibration, where you're thinking about, is my life headed in the right direction? And then remembrance is all a part of it. Now, worship should be in there. And a lot of times what people think is my Sabbath is when I go to church, but actually church can be a part of it.
Yeah.
You know, the Jews still practice Sabbath today. I was in Israel a couple of years ago, and on Friday in Jerusalem, everything shuts down. And they all get quiet, and they have family time, and they eat, and they relax. And they stay in that state all day until Saturday night when they resume their life. That was the way that it was designed to be practiced. It was a removal of normal activity where you could rest, replenish, recalibrate, and remember who God was in your life. There is something, however, that correlates to the work-life balance issue, and that is there is something that work-life balance has in common with Sabbath, and that is learning how to negotiate boundaries in your life. So the Sabbath is just a boundary issue.
Yeah.
You say, I'm going to take this time until this time, however much that is, 6 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, doesn't really matter the amount, but that you have the ability to create boundaries for yourself, to have solitude, to rest, to replenish. And that same kind of thing is necessary for how you handle your social media. So you say, I'm going to turn this device off so that I don't allow myself to be consumed by my online activity. Or with your boss, where you say, I need to negotiate some boundaries with my boss so that I don't end up being run over by my work. It's not that I want to quiet quit or coast, but I do have to know where my beginning and ending is.
Right.
Most people don't live with negotiated boundaries for themselves. And Sabbath is just one of those boundary places.
I will say, in contradiction, I think it probably should be a day. Just because that's the pattern that we see biblically.
Yep, go for it.
You know, so we have.
What I was saying is 12 hours is better than nothing. Since it's made for you and not you for it. But 24 hours is the biblical. It would be like when we say tithing. Tithing is 10%.
Right.
If you haven't been tithing and you go 3%, it's better than nothing. Gets you started down that path.
But you should go 10%.
But you should go 10%.
God's asking you to give 10%.
Yeah, right. So give a full day.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so think about this. God didn't need to create the world in 7 days. And this doesn't matter whether it's literal. I know that some of the theologians are like, maybe they wouldn't have even been days, whatever. But God didn't need to use 7 days or 6 days to create one to rest. He could have done it instantly. But part of why it's outlined like that is a pattern of this is how the world is meant to work. And this is how humans are meant to work. Actually, there's a verse in Hebrews I wanted to read. Hebrews 4 talks about this idea of entering God's rest. And in Hebrews let's see. Okay. Where is this? Okay. Trying to find specifically where I want to start. Entering God's rest. 4:8 says, "For Joshua had given them rest. God would not have spoken about another day. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest, also rests from their works, just as God did from his." It's referencing, and earlier it talks about how God rested earlier in this chapter. Verse 11, "Let us therefore make every effort," or you could say work hard, "to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience." So even in terms of when it comes to making a rest a part of your life and patterning your life after the way that God does, Hebrews actually talks about like working hard to make sure that you're actually resting. Because I think it's easy for us to slip into this. Here's what I've done. Whenever I've been Sabbathing bad, I have a day off, but that day off is just a day to do different work. Yeah. Like I catch up on all my errands and I do house projects. And to be honest, I like feel good that I caught up on stuff, but I don't think it's really resting for me. I'm just doing other stuff, other different kinds of work. But Sabbath is this idea, not in a legalistic sense, but that I'm actually going to take a minute to follow the patterns laid out for us by God, to do all those 4 things you said. And I would actually also add enjoyment into there, because it's also for you to actually take a minute, and it's okay to enjoy life. It doesn't make you lazy. I don't know if you can relate to this. I think a lot of us have this sense of, if my day is not productive, I'm lazy. Like my wife has this inner clock, Sarah, that's just like, if she hasn't achieved enough in a day, she's like, this sense of like, I'm just this, pile of poop today.
So I think it's enjoyment that is replenishing.
Yes, sure.
Okay, so there's a difference between, I loved that, and I feel healthy after that.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So like I take a long 3-mile walk, and that's enjoyment for me. That isn't rest. I might be tired physically, but at the end of the day, I feel like,
replenished.
That was helpful to me.
Right.
I also could sit down and watch a soccer game. And honestly, I'll tell you the way that I watch sports, at the end of that, I'm not replenished. Unless we won 5-0, which doesn't happen that often. I end up feeling, that just wore me out.
Sure.
So games are thorough enjoyment for me, but they aren't replenishing necessarily. They're distracting, but they're not necessarily replenishing.
That's a good point. Well, and I think, that's interesting that you talk about sports like that. I wouldn't have thought of that as a point. But yeah, I think what you're saying there is that underlying thing.
Now, if I went out and played a game, I might, if I didn't get real intense, I might feel replenished by that, because I expended some things, I competed or whatever. So every person is a little wired, a little different. And what replenishes you, what is enjoyable to you that replenishes you, might be different for you than it is for me. You have to know yourself.
Except work, though.
Except work.
I think something
like I got a lot done. I'm replenished.
I feel so accomplished. You don't understand, Pastor Jeff. Yeah. Like when I get a lot of stuff done and I feel like I achieved something, I feel replenished. But that's still work.
That's the other 6 days.
That's every other day. Every other day is meant for you to feel accomplished in that way.
Sabbath is not just meant to be done unto yourself. It's meant to be done unto God.
Yes.
It's like an enjoyment where God is invited into the process.
Yeah.
And he can walk this day with you. And you're doing it in community with other people. And so it's that kind of replenishment. And I think that's really helpful. So I'm going to propose a really creative thought. I think maybe sometimes, so first let me say, I think going to a therapist or a counselor is a really healthy thing to do.
Yeah, sure.
I think I've done it. I know you go to a therapist or a counselor, Dave. We highly recommend it. Maybe if your mental health is dragging a bit, instead of your first call being, I should probably go talk to a counselor, maybe you should say, I should try a Sabbath for a month.
Yeah.
Because maybe the insight that you need for your life and the strength that you need might come from practicing this principle for a few weeks in a row.
I agree.
And then ask yourself the question, now that I get a little more perspective from this, maybe I need to talk to a counselor. And then you could spend your Sabbaths meditating on what your counselor has told you, which is like a combo kind of thing to provide greater health to you.
Yeah. Well, you know what else too? I think sometimes it's almost like our souls get so clogged from the hurry and rush and
the
pressure
hurt and the
hurt
and the fear and the misery that stacks on top of your soul that you're carrying around. And sometimes you need to just take a little bit of time where you kind of unplug and
Yes.
unclutter and debrief with God and write in your journal and worship and breathe and laugh until then you start to say, okay, this doesn't feel so heavy anymore.
And I think the therapist point is good because that's a tool. But if you're not Sabbathing, you're really missing the main tool that God actually made people to function under, which is sort of you unclog by giving yourself one day each week.
I know I've talked about this before, but when you guys were small and I had a lot of responsibility as the pastor, I couldn't get quiet even on a Sabbath day at home, and I couldn't find space at the church office because there were so many people trying to get my attention at that time. That was the culture, was a lot of activity in the office or with the phone. So I would take one day a week and go to a Catholic retreat center in the area and just be completely unreachable.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'd take 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And be completely unreachable as a personal retreat. Actually, I think the Catholics over the centuries have done this really well, where they've created solitude centers where you get away and you just spend a little time processing. And that's kind of how I survived in the early days, was creating a boundary for myself by going to a solitude location.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing that we could talk about, a solitude. But I want to pull
Sabbath and solitude are related to each other.
You're very right.
Because somewhere in your Sabbath should be some solitude.
Which means...
Which is time to reflect.
Right. Well, and I would actually say time without noise.
Yeah.
And probably isolation.
And without social media.
I guess like even if you're in the woods, there's like birds chirping, but you're not playing music, you're not listening to an audio book.
Yeah, if you've gone into the woods, if you got into the woods and you're scrolling through Instagram, you've ruined it.
That's not solitude. Yeah. Okay. And the point I wanted to just make, you mentioned a few things that were Sabbath ruiners, which were things like the pressure of social media.
Yes.
It'd be things like answering email. And there's one point that he makes, that John Mark makes in his book, that I thought was very interesting. And he says, you need to avoid consumerism. So on your Sabbath, if you spend it shopping and you spend it like, what do I want? What do I need? That's actually not allowing yourself to say, what I have is enough, and I'm going to rest in God's goodness, and I'm going to take my time to unclench. It doesn't mean like, you can't buy food, or you can't go buy, a bowl of cereal, or go out to eat with your family. But it's this idea of if you're on Amazon, like scrolling through, trying to find all the things you want.
Although I would say my wife very much finds replenishment in shopping, not shopping to buy, just walking around a store.
Sure.
So I would, if that's you, or you're not being consumeristic, you're just walking around because it's interesting to you, it could be replenishing.
Okay, but I guess you have to analyze, is this creating in me a desire for what I don't have? Because if you're like, oh, I really want that, that's kind of anti-Sabbath in some way.
Yeah.
Sabbath is saying, what I have is enough. God is good. I can be happy with where I am. Like, I'm thankful for what I do have, and everything that needs to get done can wait until tomorrow.
This is so foreign to most of our listeners. I can tell you, like, some people are like, I have never done this. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. When can you find time for this? I got little kids. I got responsibilities. I got 2 jobs. I got church responsibilities. How will I carve this out? This is the question, right? This is the question. You have to create boundaries for yourself in your work-life balance, for your soul. So you really should have a time every day where you get a little solitude moment with God.
Yes.
And read the Bible and get yourself calibrated for the day. But then you need to have a regular time every week. And if you miss it, I can just tell you, when I'm doing good, I'm Sabbathing.
Yeah.
And when I feel that hurry sickness come on, or my soul gets all cluttered, it's because I haven't taken the proper time.
Yeah. It's a hard practice. It's
a
hard practice for anybody to have.
And it involves, again, these boundary conversations, to sit down and look at your life and your schedule and plan it out. It's like what's good for your finances when you make a budget, looking at your calendar and your weekly plan and saying, this is when I rest. Mm-hmm. This is the nights I'm off. This is when I take time with my wife or my family. This is what I need to negotiate with my boss to make sure that this is where I spend time with God every day, where you're actually disciplining your life. And I remember Bill Hybels used to talk about 3 key words to any healthy discipline is the words advanced decision making. It's where you look at your life in advance and you make a decision in advance how you're going to commit your time, and then you stick to that plan.
Yeah.
And a Sabbath is advanced decision making.
Yeah, sure.
Negotiating boundaries with your boss is advanced decision making.
And your spouse.
Yeah, getting time on a date or whatever with your spouse is advanced decision making.
Yeah.
Looking at your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday plan and knowing where it all fits in and trying to stick to that is part of how you live a healthy life. And the more responsibilities you collect, because that's me, I've collected a lot of responsibility over the years. The more disciplined I have to be in my personal boundaries.
Okay, well, so let's pause there for a second, because I think that you might be putting this out of reach for some people who aren't naturally like you, and I'm not even like you naturally.
Yeah.
You are just a mega disciplined person by nature, who has gotten even more disciplined over time because you have to be. If you're more of a free spirit, loosey-goosey, you know where everything is in your house, but it's not all in a specific place, like that kind of a person, I think you can at least pick a day that know is going to be your Sabbath.
Yeah.
You don't have to budget your whole week. You don't have to now turn into this, mega, I have like each hour charted out, because somebody's going to hear that and think, I can't do Sabbath if that's what it takes. You don't have to be a different person, but you can just still say, you know what, Saturday's my Sabbath.
Oh, but I tell you, I have boundaries on every day and it just helps me so much, but I get it. I'm a little bit tilted in that direction because it's the only way I could survive.
Sure.
However, yeah, start somewhere. Pick one day and get boundaries with it.
Yes, yeah.
So if all you do is just create a Sabbath day of boundaries, then great. But if you were really listening to the last one on quiet quitting and you feel like you have a difficult work environment, you also need to think about having some boundary plan for your work life.
So let's now shift towards that, because we talked about what soul health is, and one of probably the biggest tool is a Sabbath. If you want to get a healthy soul health, if you want to have a healthy soul, Sabbath is that thing outlined for us by God. But then let's talk about the balance. We talked a lot about boundaries and work-life balance. Why don't we shift there for the end of our conversation?
Yeah. So good places to work are places where your supervisor is willing to have conversations, not just about how much you can get done for the company, but how well you're doing as a person as you work for the company.
Yeah.
And if you do have any kind of room with your supervisor to talk about how you're doing personally, initiating those conversations is helpful. A good supervisor will do that for you.
Yeah.
They'll say, how are you? How's your family? How's your mental health?
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do to help make your life better? That makes it a great place to work. But if you don't have that naturally, and it's just maybe you have a good boss, but the boss is just not aware of that, I think you need to have a conversation probably once every 3 to 6 months where you talk about your rhythms and where you see that maybe your life is a little bit out of whack, or maybe you're being expected to do things beyond what is reasonable, where you ask your boss what their priorities are for you. You propose some boundaries that you feel like are necessary for your life to be healthy. Like, these nights I have to be with my family, my kids have this going on. And then you also are willing to be flexible to realize that there are times and seasons when all rules are off. Like the company's in a crisis, everybody has to just work a little extra hard for a month until you get through tax season or the retail month of November and December or whatever, where you can expect that there are some rhythms that you have to the business you're in, but that there's going to be a time for you to catch your breath. And I think having those conversations where you negotiate is the first step, not quite quitting, which is where I'm just going to lay back and hope no one notices.
Yeah.
I think being able to with a clean conscience, know you're operating within the sphere of what your supervisor has asked of you, and you've designed an approach to your work that's healthy, and you've created the boundaries that are agreed upon with your supervisor so that you can operate within their oversight, but in a healthy way. Yeah. And that conversation too might need to be had with your spouse, right? Where you say, if you have kids, what's our plan? When do we give one another personal time? When do we make time for our relationship? How do we factor this in so that we get the help and babysitting that we need to be able to do the things we need to do?
Yeah.
All of those things need to be discussed so that you're approaching it with agreement. See, that's the thing. A boundary is it's not a reaction. Like, don't wait till you fall apart. Like, I can't do this job anymore. I can't, you're asking way too much for me. Then it's sort of like people are like, okay, well, don't quit on me. Let's just figure something out.
Yeah.
But where you proactively have reflected on it, gotten some coaching on it, and you sat down together with whoever you're involved with, and you propose a plan that everybody can agree on, and then you walk it out.
I actually think, though, before you even get to the part of where you're negotiating boundaries, there's actually a previous step that maybe we need to talk about, which is you first need to know what you're trying to budget for.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have a family with kids, you probably need a stronger boundary selection than someone who's just single and can kind of grind a little more and work a little longer hours. So now that I have a newborn son, there are definitely times whenever I need to be home earlier, even though when I was just married and we didn't have kids, because I can't just leave a screaming newborn with my wife all the time without being with him and spending time with them. So
if you just had kids recently, or you just had more kids,
right,
or you've adopted a child, or you're fostering, you better factor that into your life plan. Because you just added a massive weight of responsibility into your life.
Right.
So that makes being healthy in your soul and healthy at work and healthy spiritually even more challenging. And that means you just have to do a little bit of a better job of budgeting your time and creating those boundaries. It can be done.
Absolutely.
So let me just testify. I don't keep my Sabbath perfectly every week, but I'm pretty regimented with it. It's been really healthy for me. I am currently running 4 organizations, and they pull at me all the time in different directions. And I'm able to do that and still be at home at night and still be healthy. And I've been here 31 years. It's part of the key of longevity. But there's never a moment it's easy. And there's never a moment when I don't feel like I better make some choices here, because I can feel inside that anxiety rising.
Yeah.
So I deal with the anxiety and the temptation toward hurry, sickness, and I have to process the hurts and frustrations that happen. But it is possible to live a highly productive life with longevity and purpose and be healthy.
Yeah.
In your marriage, as a parent, in whatever it is that you're called to do. But it requires you to be disciplined about creating boundaries for your life, your schedule, and your time.
Yeah.
Because no one cares about the health of your soul like you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice when you have a pastor who looks in on you, or a friend who's mentoring you, or a counselor who's speaking into your life. But if you don't deal with your own soul health, nobody else will.
Yeah.
And so you have to prioritize your soul.
Yeah.
What does it say in Proverbs 4:23? Above all else, guard your heart, because out of it is the wellspring of life.
Mm-hmm.
So your inner life will determine so much about who you are and what you're able to do.
Yeah.
And if you don't manage your inner life, it eventually will manage you. And so you have to get ahead of the game, but it can be done.
It can be done. Okay, so kind of as we summarize, if I can try to just recontext what your sort of points are, it's we need to work hard because we are trying to work as if unto God, but work cannot be the purpose for our life to where we are measuring our value based off of our achievements and success. So
that was last week's episode, right? Or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The last podcast was about how we need to work hard, but don't let it. And so that's a factor for soul health. We then have tools to keep our soul healthy, like the Sabbath, which is laid out for us by Jesus. I could have gone into all the times he went off to a quiet place to have solitude and to rest. Jesus Sabbath like crazy. He did talk about how you don't want to be religious with it.
Oh, he was very good at boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd be with the multitude, and then all of a sudden he'd be like, "I'm done."
Yeah, and he'd go up by himself.
He'd walk up by himself,
and he'd Sabbath. Yeah. So even he modeled that for us. But so we have Sabbath as a tool, work life balance, which is really maintained by setting boundaries from advanced decision making. Is that kind of a summary?
Yeah. And here's a promise. There's a good chapter in Isaiah 58, it is, if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, and you call the Sabbath a delight, and you honor it by not going your own way and doing as you please and speaking idle words, there's some good insight into that, then you will find your joy in the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay? Boy, this is good. We need joy back in our life. The Sabbath will help you get that. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land. You'll ride over it rather than feeling like you're constantly under it. and you will feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. You will enjoy a rich spiritual inheritance that comes from a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And then it says, the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, there's some great promises there.
Yeah.
You'll find joy. You'll live an overcoming life. You'll have a rich, deep spiritual heritage that you can pass on to the next generation if you focus yourself just on that one practice of Sabbathing. And so let's just end like this. Try it once. Give yourself a Sabbath this week.
Well, can I give a previous challenge to that?
Yeah.
Start by admitting you need a Sabbath.
Yeah.
And stop making excuses about why you don't need one personally or why it's impossible. Because I think it starts with, okay, I need to take one.
Yeah.
And then it probably is that. Take a step in that direction.
Yeah.
Take one.
And maybe you need a little personal retreat. Find a way to do that. There are some great places around the region. You just look for them where you can get alone, sometimes for free. But pay attention to the health of your soul. Establish some boundaries for yourself. Start to negotiate with yourself and your boss and people in your life for your schedule. And gradually, you'll get back to a place, I think, of health.
Can you imagine what it would look like if we had a world full of Christians that were the hardest workers with the most healthy souls?
Yeah, that's a good vision, huh?
You know, and I think we can all take steps that
Well,
direction.
I will admit in front of everybody that I'm doing pretty good on the hard work part, but I know I have work to do on the health of my soul. Like I'm even challenged to get a little bit more disciplined with my Sabbath than I have been recently.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give anyone the perception that I'm doing this perfectly.
Sure.
I could use that myself.
Yeah. This is one of those sermons you preach to yourself.
Yeah.
Where it's like, all right, slow down. I mean, like we need to all
and
be
there's some
healthier.
great books that you might want to read that will help you give more information in these.
Yeah, so one of the easiest ones to start with is the ruthless elimination of hurry, which has 4 practices. And then if you want to hear a little bit more about
what are the 4, by the way? Do you remember those?
Okay. The 4 were silence, solitude, Sabbath, and simplicity.
Okay.
Which is the idea that what I have is enough, that you don't have to get sucked into this consumeristic, like, you'll be happy with that next car. It's like, just practice, like, it's almost, akin to minimalism.
Yeah,
Less
declutter.
is more.
Yeah.
Declutter. Be happy with what God's provided for you.
So the ruthless elimination of hurry, and the second book he wrote.
It's by the same author. It's called Garden City by John Mark Comer. That's
beautiful.
all detail on what the Sabbath is and how he Sabbaths and some recommended practice. He's a hardcore Sabbather. He actually, so much so that I'm like, I don't know that I can quite do it like you, but like he pushes me in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think that Sabbathing closer to what he recommends and what the Bible outlines as a pattern is so healthy for me because I was not doing that well enough, and it's been life-changing.
Yeah,
So-
and if you're a pastor, your Sabbath can't be the day you're in church because you're typically more drained that day than any other day. So you have to pick another day. And for me, I merge that with meditating on what I'm going to preach.
So good.
So that I'm thinking about the word as I'm taking some time. So that's kind of how it fits into a pastor's schedule.
Right. Maybe you're not actually writing it, but you're meditating and
Yeah.
allowing it to speak to you and for God to be in that. Yeah, that's great. Well, hey, we just want to thank you again for joining our conversation. Thank you for suggesting some of these topics, because without your input, we probably wouldn't have even been on these 2.
And coming soon, we're going to do a podcast episode on hell.
Yeah. If we wouldn't have needed to do a part 2, I was thinking, ooh, it's October, spooky month. Like, you could have done it now, but maybe
soon. By the way, I also saw some new UFO information is out just recently, so I'll have to send that to you.
Ooh, UFOs part 3. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah. So, hey, we want to thank you for joining us. And as always, we would just love it if you would consider just taking a second to take your phone, open up to Apple Podcasts or whatever app you listen to it on. Leave a 5-star review. It helps us to spread the word. If you're on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. You can put the notifications on so you see when a new video comes out. On social media, you can share. I know all this stuff is stuff that takes a minute, but it would mean a lot to us because it does help us to spread the word and reach more people with what we're trying to help invest into our listeners. So as always, thanks so much. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you guys next time.